Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Segment 1, take 2. Welcome to the GSMC Music Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Rory O'Toole. Now, on the show, today we're going to be getting into a plethora of topics. First, we're going to cover the 50th anniversary of the Beatles breakup. Then after that, we're going to get into the best and worst of the week in music. And then we're going to wrap up the show with a little discussion on music and politics and the relationship there and the complications that come with it. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the show today. So without further ado, let's get into it. 50 years since the Beatles broke up. I remember it like it was yesterday. Just kidding. I'm only 24. I do not remember it at all. Yet, me as a 24-year-old is as familiar with the Beatles breakup and the stories behind it, the myths behind it, as people who were around for it. That is how powerful the Beatles are as a cultural force, as music icons, as pop cultural figures. I don't need to go into what the Beatles mean for culture. It's obvious. But the breakup, just like everything the Beatles did, was momentous and remembered for time in memoriam. So just to give you guys a sense of the history behind the breakup before we get into the implications and the legacy of it, let me just give you some fast facts here. So the Beatles officially banned 1962 to 1969. 7 years, which is crazy considering all the albums they blessed us with. Of course, that doesn't include the time they spent as a band in Hamburg and when they were playing the Cavern Club in Liverpool. So in reality, they've been together a lot longer than that, but officially, on the mainstream, as a corporate business, as a real licensed, real honest-to-goodness band, 1962, 1969. Now, they kind of officially break up in 1970, but as you'll see here, there's a lot of pre-breakups up until that point, and they are formally broken up in 1975, so it sort of takes a while. It's both very dramatic and very anticlimactic at the same time. And the Rolling Stone magazine just did a piece written by Rob Sheffield on the Beatles' 50th anniversary of the breakup. And what he wrote here, I think, sums it up pretty well. He said, "The world has spent 50 years collecting the cliche narratives. John and Paul were fighting. Paul and Yoko were fighting. John and Yoko became junkies. The money men came between them. The drugs came between them. The wives came between them. All things must pass. The dream is over." But as with most Beatles stories, the truth is a lot more complicated when you look closely. In the end, it's really a story about four friends trying to hold on to one another in the dark and confusing times, searching for a way to shine on until tomorrow. It is more complicated than the public understanding of it, whether it's just like, oh yeah, Yoko broke up the band, or they just got tired of each other. I don't know, it's simple. There's a lot of layers to the breakup, and I'm not going to cover everything in detail, but I'm going to give us all a surface level understanding of the breakup, and then after the break we can go a little deeper into the implications and the sources of it. But even then, I urge you to read the Beatles books, read Rob Sheffield's article in Rolling Stone, do your own research on the breakup. It's pretty fascinating, as most band breakups are. So let's get into what the basic factors were behind the breakup. So we have the strain of the Beatlemania phenomenon. We have the death of manager Brian Epstein in 1967. We have Paul McCartney's controlling personality. We have John Lennon's descent into heroin addiction. We have John Lennon's relationship with Yoko Ono and her involvement with the band. We have George Harrison's prolific songwriting output being stunted within the band. We have the trouble with Apple Corps as a business. We have the Get Back project in 1970. We have managerial disputes. And we have the end of the Beatles. So to get into it, let's start with the strain of the Beatlemania phenomenon. So by 1966, the Beatles had already grown pretty tired with live performances. George Harrison was the first to be exhausted with it, while Paul McCartney was the one who kind of held out to the idea of, no, it's important that we maintain touring because bands need live performances to keep sharp and to keep themselves up to date and strong as a band. To play all the time, work out your muscles, as musically. However, McCartney finally ceded to not only Harrison, but Lennon and Ringo's insistence that the group stop touring towards the end of their 1966 tour of America. Afterward, Harrison informed manager Brian Epstein that he was leaving the band, but he was persuaded to stay on the assurance that there would be no more tours. So already in 1966, we have George Harrison threatening to leave the band. And the Beatles saying we're done with touring. So already in that area we have they're getting fatigued, and George Harrison feels like he needs to move on from the band. Fun fact, by the way, for anyone from San Francisco, their last live performance was at Candlestick Park. So they ended their touring, their live performances, in the coldest venue in America. Pretty fitting for what was probably a sad last concert. So we also have the death of Brian Epstein in 1967, as I mentioned. Now, Brian Epstein was their manager and sort of the one who kept them not only in good business situations, but also supported them emotionally and creatively, and was kind of the mediator, sort of the big brother parental figure, especially to someone like John, who was always looking for a father figure since he didn't have a father in his life. Very important to John, very important to the band as a adult with a capital A in the room. And his style was basically to let the group pursue whatever their creative, in whatever they want to do creatively, he'd let them do it, while often mediating whenever there was conflict. So if there's fights, Epstein's going to solve it. He also managed finances, of course. In 1967, before his death, he initiated Apple Corps as a tax shelter that was a way to save them and maximize their income. And when he died on August 27th from an accidental overdose, the Beatles were shocked. John was distraught. And overall, the band was disoriented and fearful about the future. So, again, they're already fatigued. We're already seeing cracks in the surface. Then Brian Epstein dies. Now they're thrown for a loop. Of course, they're grieving. They've lost one of their best mates, one of their father figures. And they also don't have a clue about business. And they're very paranoid about anyone approaching them business-wise, but at the same time confused what to do financially because they are not well-versed in finances. And Epstein's role as the band manager was never really replaced, and that lack of leadership contributed hugely to the breakup because they didn't have that figure to get them all together, get them all in the same room, work out their differences. That sort of figure was gone. As Sheffield writes, right up until Epstein's death, they were four soulmates who wanted to spend their free time together, even when they weren't working. Quote, most people don't get across to us, Lennon said in 1967. We never really communicated with other people. Now that we don't meet strangers at all, there is no need for any communication. We understand each other. It doesn't matter about the rest. When they quit touring after Revolver, they tried taking a 3-month break, but they missed each other too much. As John said, I didn't meet anyone else I liked. So up until then, especially up until Revolver, these guys hung out all the time, got along super well. Yes, George was getting the little brother treatment and wanted to leave. But overall, John and Paul's relationship especially was really strong, and the whole band felt like a unit, like a family. They loved spending time with each other. Brian Epstein's death threw them all for a loop and kind of complicated that dynamic. Now, Paul McCartney was always seeking to initiate projects for the group, although his bandmates were growing more perturbed by his growing domination in the musical direction of the band. So albums like Sgt. Pepper and Get Back, which we'll get into, are Paul's ideas. He's sort of the idea guy of the Beatles. He says, hey, let's do Sgt. Pepper. That way we can assume personas. We don't have to be the Beatles anymore. We can have these alter egos, escape our fame, and keep things creative and new and fresh. But at the same time, the more he's allowed to do that, the more he feels the agency to drive the direction of the band, sometimes without consulting his bandmates, which of course pisses them off. And also McCartney was maintaining this interest in pop music, and the rest of the band, especially Harrison and John Lennon, were either developing interest in Indian music or experimental and avant-garde sounds. Beatles historian Mark Lewison said Sgt. Pepper represented the group's last unified effort, displaying a cohesion that deteriorated immediately after the album's completion and entirely disappeared by 1968. So already by 1968, that cohesion, that unified creative vision is sort of gone. And Paul McCartney is trying to take... You have these power dynamics where Paul McCartney is trying to control the band. John Lennon still sees himself as the leader, but is sort of not reliable. He's on heroin. He's growing... spending more time with Yoko. And George Harrison himself has a big ego and says, I'm not listening to any of you. And Ringo's just in the back like, I miss my family. I'm just trying to have fun here. This is just a miserable experience for me. So it's getting bad already by 1968. Now, Yoko started appearing often during the recording of the White Album. Her presence there was highly unorthodox, as prior to that, the Beatles had generally worked in isolation, rarely inviting wives and girlfriends to recording sessions. As Lennon told Rolling Stone, Yoko was naive. She came in and she would expect to perform with them like you would with any other group. But with the Beatles, you don't do that. This is a space just for the Beatles. No one else in. So John Lennon bringing Yoko in created a lot of tension in the room. From George Harrison's perspective, he continued to develop as a songwriter, yet he was receiving little support from within the band during recording sessions. He wrote songs like Not Guilty that kind of give a glimpse into his state of mind after his return from India. Remember, they went to India on a retreat with the Indian guru, the Maharishi. George Harrison was a huge student of transcendental meditation, but the rest of his bandmates weren't so into it. Paul left after 2 weeks, I believe, and was just writing songs basically the whole time. John thought the Maharishi was full of crap, and Ringo thought the food was terrible. So they didn't have the spiritual experience that George wanted them to, and to George it just proved to him how different he was from his bandmates already. He was moving in a more spiritual direction. Also, he was enjoying rewarding collaborations outside the band, including with Eric Clapton and Bob Dylan and Bob Dylan's band, The Band. And combining that with the patronizing nature of Paul McCartney towards George and his estrangement from Lennon as Lennon was getting more involved with Yoko, he wanted to hang out with people who treated him with the respect he craved from his bandmates. And he felt like he wasn't getting it with the Beatles as we moved towards 1970. Also, Apple Corps, the corporation they started for their music, for their label, was having huge financial problems. I believe one of their accountants left because their finances were such a mess, and he left a note saying, essentially, you guys need to get your stuff together because this is really, really bad. And in comes the managerial disputes. So, you essentially get a dynamic where Paul McCartney wants to bring in a manager. Again, we still haven't replaced Brian Epstein. He wants to bring in his father-in-law and his brother-in-law as managers, who are New York attorneys. His wife, Linda Eastman, whom he married in 1969 or 1970. He wanted to bring in them as the managers. And of course, the other Beatles are like, yeah, let's not mix family with business. That's not a good plan. So the other three, especially John, fancy themselves to Alan Klein, who is the founder of ABKCO Records. He chose him pretty quick, didn't really do his homework. He had a bit of an unsavory reputation. He had spent years in the business working with artists like Sam Cooke. He had the Rolling Stones under his thumb at one point and walked off with their catalog to that point. Now, we have two conflicting reports. One says that Mick Jagger declined to warn the Beatles about Klein's untrustworthiness. As John said, really it was Mick who got us together. I had heard about all those dreadful rumors about him, but I could never coordinate it with the fact that the Stones seemed to be going on and on with him, and nobody ever said a word. Mick's not the type to just clam up, so I started thinking he must be alright. Yet there's a conflicting story that goes that Mick actually slipped a note which warned him about Klein, which basically said stay away from him, keep him far away, so who knows what's true on that front. Now, eventually, Paul's suspicions were validated by the early 1970s when his bandmates had their own lawsuits with Klein. He also went to jail for income tax evasion. In the end, we did get rid of Alan Klein, Ringo Starr said in an anthology. It cost us a small fortune. That being said, Klein wedged himself between the Beatles. In 1967, they're hanging out with the Maharishi. 2 years later, they're spending time with lawyers and accountants, having this legal dispute. As Lennon told Rolling Stone in 1970, it just got that Paul would say, "Speak to my lawyer, I don't want to speak about business anymore," which meant I'm going to drag my feet and try and bleep you. In March of 1969, Lennon informed the band he wanted a divorce. Now, Lennon was known for these sort of outbursts where he liked to be... Lennon's the type of guy who he doesn't want to be broken up with. He wants to break up with you. Yet, the band doesn't officially break up then. They pursue the Get Back project, which was a idea hatched by Paul McCartney. Let's get back in the studio. Let's do a live performance, outdoor recording, to have it filmed with a whole film crew, make a documentary of it perhaps, maybe a concert movie. They recorded this at Twickenham Studios, so they're not at their favorite Abbey Road studios. And it did sound like a perfect idea. It's just the four of them and their instruments ready to hit the studio, return to the roots, make some great songs out of thin air. The problem was they weren't great relationship-wise. That moment, in order to have an environment like that pay off, you need to have good relationships, and by that point the relationships were already pretty bad. I mean, George had already quit the band in 1966, and then during recordings of Get Back, with cameras rolling, as he's trying to teach them a new song, All Things Must Pass, John is strung out on heroin, sneers at George with open contempt. George finally stormed out muttering, "See you around the clubs." And John doesn't take it seriously. He says, "I think if George doesn't come back by Monday or Tuesday, we ask Eric Clapton to play in it." The point is, if George leaves, do we want to carry on the Beatles? I do. We should just get other members and carry on. Now, of course, George eventually comes back. They finish the album, or they finish recording it. The album actually won't be done until after Abbey Road, actually. And maybe if they had taken a break, not done this, maybe the band could have been saved. But this basically turned out to be a disaster. It didn't work. And when Paul and producer George Martin discovered that Klein had sent Phil Spector to fiddle with the Get Back recording, and the other three asked Paul to push back his forthcoming album, solo album, Paul quits in a news release on August 22nd, stating that the Beatles were taking a break from working together. So, they record Get Back. Doesn't go well. They have that famous last concert on the roof. Last live performance they ever did. That gathers dust for a few months, maybe a year. Then they record Abbey Road. Of course, Abbey Road is a smash hit. Then after Abbey Road, they're fiddling with the Get Back recordings. Alan Klein, who's the manager for the three, but not for Paul, hires Phil Spector to fiddle with the record. That pisses Paul off. The other Beatles have Let It Be scheduled for a date that is in conflict with Paul's solo album coming out. Paul is offended by them asking to push back his own album. It's this huge row. And essentially, Paul releases a press release saying, answering a few questions about the band, and he says, "I don't know if I see myself working with them anytime soon. I don't know if I see myself writing songs with John again." And on April 10th, reporters and some of the band's fans began gathering outside the Apple Corps offices at 3 Savile Row. And to sum it up, a CBS News team reported that the event is so momentous that historians may one day view it as a landmark in the decline of the British Empire. The Beatles are breaking up. That's the level of drama that their breakup was greeted with by the news media, by the public. That being said, no one knew if this was a permanent breakup, and looking at quotes of the time, even the Beatles themselves didn't really fathom that this was the end. As we see here with George Harrison, he said, "It'd be very selfish for the Beatles to not record together again, considering how much they meant to people." He went on to imply that once all the members had completed their solo records, they'd come back together eventually. Lennon suggested that he was interested in recording again with the Beatles, saying of the current turn of events, "It could be a rebirth or a death. We'll see what it is. It'll probably be a rebirth." However, we know that doesn't happen, and after lots of legal hand-wringing on McCartney's part to leave Apple and the band, and with the other three members eager to rid themselves of Klein's management, the band formally dissolved in January of 1975. After the break, we will be getting into the implications, the legacy, and what we're going to remember going forward 50 years later about the Beatles breakup.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
Welcome back. Still with the GSMC Music Podcast. Still talking about the Beatles breakup. So we just went through how it happened, the timeline of it all, beat by beat. Now let's talk about the big picture of the Beatles breakup. What it meant for culture, what it meant for music, and why we're still talking about this 50 years later. Still talking about it. Now, when this happened, it was like a bomb went off culturally for people. The Beatles breaking up, even though the writing was on the wall, especially in hindsight, was unfathomable to people. People could not imagine the music world without the Beatles. The Beatles were not just rock music, they were pop music, they were cultural thinkers, cultural symbols. The way people of the 60s, especially young people, saw themselves, they saw it reflected in the Beatles themselves. People had conversations like the way you have a conversation today where, oh, you're like Rachel from Friends. That's the way people talk to, oh, I'm more of a John, he's more of a Paul, you're a Ringo, he's a George, yada yada. That's the way people saw the Beatles. They were synonymous, always hanging over culture. It was almost like when you had discussions about music, you wouldn't even discuss the Beatles because it's just boring in a way to discuss their greatness. Everyone agreed, like, yeah, they're the best. They drive it, everything. They are essentially leading where everything goes. And so when that news came that the Beatles were breaking up, essentially, it was like someone had died. It was as if music itself had died. To have them break up was like ending music, just canceling music. It was music without the Beatles. What is that even? Because it's almost like a BC versus CE thing. Like there's before and there's after. You can't even imagine the after. People were just perplexed. They were grieving as if a family member died. A lot of people felt like these lads from Liverpool were their family. They knew them in their living rooms, from live shows, from movies. They were almost like family members like long-lost cousins to most of America, to most of the world, for that matter. And to have them disappear, to have them voluntarily break up for what didn't seem like any good reason was just shocking to everyone. Like I said, the Beatles were on the forefront of leading music. They're essentially a North Star for popular music. So without them, the music world, from fans to executives, was completely flummoxed as to where they should go next, because everyone had sort of relied on the Beatles to do the work for them. They would innovate, and the rest of the music world would follow. Now that the Beatles were gone, the music industry, music fans are like, where are we? We're adrift in a sea of uncertainty now. And unsurprisingly, people were looking for a scapegoat. And that scapegoat was a Japanese woman, Yoko Ono, John Lennon's girlfriend, John Lennon's wife. This is a common thing in human nature. You're going to look for a scapegoat, and then you add on the layers of she's a woman of color, she's came on later in the life of the band, she's just a woman in general who often get blamed for things going wrong. Go back to the annals of history. There's a lot of quote-unquote witches being burned. Yeah, when things are going bad, people oftentimes turn on women. And then you had, of course, who is she? A Yoko Ono, this exotic woman, this temptress. She tricked John. She ruined the band. She poisoned the well. When in reality, we can see the band was already fracturing well before Yoko entered the picture. And even Yoko, her reaction to when the Beatles broke up was one of nervousness. She realized that now John was going to have to rely on her totally, and she was scared that she could not provide the same amount of support that he had gotten from his band all these years. And the Yoko myth, blaming her, has sort of gone out of vogue. Finally, it seems to be that most people are of the opinion that, you know what, blaming this all on Yoko is either racist, short-sighted, or lazy. But there's still a lot of people who blame Yoko, and I'm not saying she didn't play any role. Obviously, her being there in the studio, her encouraging John to take on more experimental forms of music that weren't always great music. Maybe you can lay some blame on her for that, but she's certainly not responsible for a band that was already fracturing. Whether you're looking at George Harrison, you're looking at the dynamics of Paul and John, you're looking at just creative differences. They're getting older. These bands oftentimes age like dogs. You only have a certain amount of time together before it gets stale. Blaming it all on Yoko isn't exactly fair. Also, in total Beatles fashion, they sort of invent the breakup of a band. Not to say that bands didn't break up before the Beatles. Of course they did. But in the public and messy and dramatic fashion that they did, which we're all used to now when bands break up, that wasn't really seen before. So the Beatles, they innovated music, and of course they innovated breaking up. They innovated divorcing creatively. So a great legacy there as well, where you're getting these shots in the press, one person talking about the other. You get people gathering outside the offices crying like someone has died. You get the op-eds taking sides. You get fans taking sides. You get the questions a decade after they break up, 20 years after they break up, 30 years after they break up. It kind of becomes almost as big as the music is the story of the breakup. Everyone loves a good breakup story, and the Beatles have one of the best. And that's one of their biggest legacies as well. Now, the breakup of the Beatles, in my view, it was time, it was money, it was business, it was mostly creative exhaustion and creative growth that broke them up. And I know that's a very boring answer to say, well, it's a combination of all these factors, but when you look at the summation of the Beatles' career, it's going to be a ton of different variables that break up a band, especially when you have 4 people. They're not all going to have these same reasons for breaking up. All 4 were distinct personalities, and they all had their own reasons for breaking up. But those are basically the main factors hovering over all 4 of them. As we've hinted at before, George was really growing creatively. He was a prolific songwriter. Think of songs like While My Guitar Gently Weeps. That kind of lyrical ability was being stunted with the Beatles because they'd give him, 2 or 3 songs an album to write? Sometimes less, especially earlier in the career. And he's hanging out with dudes like Bob Dylan and Eric Clapton who are treat him like an equal. And he says, what, you guys treat me like an equal? The outside world treats me like I'm great, but when I'm with the band, Paul and John treat me like the little brother, and I'm over it. I need to do my own thing, and that's totally understandable, totally reasonable. Then you look at Paul and John, it's already likely that there is going to be some blow-ups because they're both so talented. They're both 2 frontmen in a band. That's going to lead to conflict. Probably going to lead to a breakup. Of course it did. Paul and John always loved each other. They were always jealous of each other. They always admired each other. They had great respect for each other. But they also had their own little petty little beefs. Because they both knew the other guy was super talented, but they were also just annoyed by the way they carried themselves. Paul found John's laziness and descent into experimentation and drugs as unproductive and unhelpful, and also felt a little bad for him, felt he was always looking for a father figure to fill the hole that was John Lennon's tough childhood. And John looked at Paul as this little pipsqueak who he sort of groomed and then stabbed him in the back from time to time, was always maneuvering and conniving and trying to get control of the band, trying to get control of the finances, trying to become the leader without asking. And Ringo, he's a family man. He didn't start with the band originally. He came on later, so he always felt like an odd man out. Now, he was a great personality. He got along with everyone, but he felt like, obviously, I'm overlooked in this band and was sort of felt like hired help a lot of the time. And he's a talented dude in his own right and wanted to do his own stuff. Now, is there a world where, like John and George were saying, let's just do our solo projects and then come back as a band? Yes, I think there's a world where that could have happened. But Paul really wasn't about it. Paul's the type of guy who says, I'm either fully in the band or I'm solo. I'm not going to do this back and forth business. And let's be honest, that would not have been a sustainable model for the Beatles. They wouldn't have been reliable and consistent enough to, alright, yeah, solo time. Okay, now we're going to come back as a band. Once you go off doing your own solo stuff, to go back into band dynamics is really tough and unrealistic. And let's be honest, they had all become family men. They started off as teenagers in Hamburg, playing clubs, having fun, partying, having their all coming of age events. And then they meet women that they love. They have children. They have families. They have all sorts of complications that come with that are keeping them away, that chip away at the band's unit, because when it's just you and your mates, you don't have a wife, you don't have kids, it's a lot easier to stay together. Once you have that adds a layer of complexity, a layer of just what are your priorities? Are your priorities the band or your priorities your family? Your family's going to be your top priority, and while that's great and understandable, For the band, they suffered for it because it meant that with less commitment meant less incentive to keep the band together. That being said, they mourned each other and they always loved one another. I mean, think about what I talked about before the break, where they spent all their time together. Couldn't communicate with anyone else because they felt they got each other on such a level that no other person could really approach. And they were just an inseparable little tribe. And though they broke up, they could never recreate that again in their lives. And they all missed it tremendously. Being in the Beatles is not something that you're ever going to be able to recreate. And that being said, Paul had a very successful solo career. George Harrison, very successful solo career. He has one of the best albums of the 70s, to be honest. Ringo, he becomes an actor. He has a solo career. John becomes a political activist, has a successful solo career, becomes a cultural icon. They all do well afterwards, but at the same time they know that it's not approaching what the Beatles were, because together they were as powerful as the sun. Apart, they're really good, but they're not that overwhelming, brilliant force that they were when they were the Fab Four when they were together. And before we wrap this up, I also like to point out that the Beatles breaking up was a positive in the sense that it was an example of artists taking control of their own career, taking control of their own direction, and using their leverage as celebrities and as famous musicians to drive their career where they wanted it. Previous to that, music managers, record companies sold musicians, controlled them like they were machines, like they weren't people. They were just products to them, and they would shuffle around their band. They would send them on these crazy tour schedules, these crazy press runs. They basically controlled their life and used them up until they were strung out or dead tired or screwed up, and then go find the next one. It was horrible what the record industry did to musicians back then. It's still terrible, but the Beatles, with them breaking up, was an example of them taking control of their own artistic legacy and their own careers, because obviously the record company's management says, we want you to be together for 1,000 years because you make so much money. We don't want you to ever break up. And before that, record companies and managers would usually find a way to keep you essentially as a slave. The Beatles taking control of their own careers, deciding to end it. Yes, it took a lot, and Ringo said it took a small fortune to work it out, but they eventually did. And you're seeing that kind of now in sports, with athletes leaving in free agency, taking control of their own careers, not letting ownership and franchises decide what happens to them. You saw this with music, with the Beatles breaking up. They realized they were empowered to exercise their agency and their power to do what they want. And I think that's a beautiful and positive impact that they sort of trailblazed. And to finally wrap it up, the Beatles breakup, it was messy, it was sad. It's like all relationship breakups. There was a moment, a long, long moment, 7 years, where things were beautiful. They produced some amazing music. If aliens ever come to Earth, we're going to show them the Beatles. Rock music, in the future, when it's not really a genre anymore, when people don't really recognize it for what it was, they're going to associate rock music with the Beatles, in my mind. The Beatles will become rock music, and maybe even pop music, to future humans, in 2100 and 2200. That's going to be their idea of what culture and music was back then. And that's a hugely powerful legacy. 50 years on, We're talking about their breakup in granular detail. And I'm just scratching the surface here. Please go read and research. It's a fascinating tale. Ultimately, the Beatles' breakup was sad, but it was kind of inevitable. We can be sad about what could have happened if they stayed together, but from what we got, I don't know how you could ask for much more. They gave us so much brilliance. More brilliance than we really deserve. And for that, we're forever grateful. 50 years later, it still hurts, but the music still lives. After the break, we're going to get into the best and worst of the week in music.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. We just got through talking about the 50th anniversary of the Beatles breakup. Now we're going to get into some more contemporary music discussions. Something that's been happening in 2020. Specifically, some notable news of the past week. We're going to call this segment the best and worst of the week. Let's start with the worst, because I like to get the bad news out of the way first. Whenever someone's like, do you want the bad news or do you want the good news first? I'm always say, give me the bad news first. That way I can really just get it over with, rip the Band-Aid off, so to say. And speaking of ripping Band-Aids off, Megan Thee Stallion finally came out and said what we all kind of suspected, that Mr. Torey Lanez had indeed shot her in her feet. Now, we talked about this on a previous podcast towards the end of July, I believe July 24th, somewhere in that range. News broke that Megan Thee Stallion had been in an altercation, and her and Torey Lanez were in a situation with the police. Torey Lanez ended up getting arrested, getting charged with a concealed weapon, and then we found out Megan had sustained injuries on her feet. And from the days after that, people kind of put two and two together, and it was like, I think Torey Lanez shot Megan Thee Stallion. And that was sort of what we all suspected. But Megan, because of, I'm sure, at the advice of her lawyers, it is an ongoing investigation currently with LAPD. She did not come out and say anything. But she finally did. She went on Instagram, as she usually does, to explain herself. And explain that she was in a car with Lanez and a member of his security team. They had an argument. As people often do when they're in an argument in a car, they demand to leave the car so they can leave the situation entirely. And as she was walking away, remember, her back is turned, she's walking away from the car, she's leaving, she's trying to defuse the situation. Mr. Torey Lanez shoots her. Probably, I doubt he was aiming for her feet. He probably just aimed indiscriminately, and knowing about Torey Lanez and the fact that he is a midget, probably missed his target and hit her in the feet. Because the man probably can't aim too well. Grazed both her feet. She sustained injuries to her feet, had to get surgery, and that was that. And obviously, Lanez was the bad guy in this. But the internet being the internet, of course, there are people saying, oh, this didn't happen, or Megan, you're a snitch for even implicating Lanez in the incident. You should have stayed quiet, or it didn't happen. It's a setup, blah, 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 all kinds of nonsense. So Megan felt the need to come out and explain herself. She especially took exception to those who said she lied about the incident, especially after initial reports from the police suggested her injuries were consistent with those caused by broken glass. During the video, Megan suggested there were false reports about her injuries surfaced because she didn't initially tell police at the scene that Lanez had shot her. She explained in the video that she was fearful of telling police what really happened because of her inherent fear of police. Quote, you think I'm about to tell police that we black people got a gun in the car? You want me to tell the law that we got a gun in the car so they can shoot all of us up? So, basically, Megan gets shot unexpected. She's in an argument. She leaves the car. When she leaves the car, she gets shot in her feet. Police come. She needs medical attention. She's mad at Torey Lanez for shooting her in the foot, obviously. But she's more fearful of what might happen and how quickly this whole situation could spiral out of control with law enforcement. So she decides to keep quiet at the moment. Don't implicate Torey right away. So, of course, the police say, well, to prove that he shot her in the foot, because it wasn't like the bullets went right through her feet, they kind of grazed her feet. They're like, you know what, this could be broken glass. It's going to be hard to prove in a court of law that it was, definitely a shooting. So they say, you know what, it's broken glass, whatever. Torey Lanez walks away, Megan walks away, but then that's used by the public to discredit Megan. So she came out and finally said what we all kind of knew to be the case. It was not broken glass. She got shot in her feet because Torey Lanez was mad. And just want to say, Torey Lanez, I didn't listen to your music before. I'm definitely not going to listen to your music now. Whoever works with Torey Lanez, that's a bad move. Obviously, Megan's career is on the up. Torey's career is on the downslope. And take away the professional implications, just from what's right and what's wrong. To support Torey Lanez at this point, I don't know why you would do so. The dude is basically a coward. If you're going to shoot someone who's walking away from you, definitely not a threat. They're leaving the scene, and then you shoot them. That's a cowardly act. I don't need to hear back from you. Anyways, moving on. In more, I don't know if this is best or worst of the week. We'll say this is some meh of the week, where it's not bad. It's not good. It's just okay. Pharrell and Jay-Z released a song called Entrepreneur, which is pretty fitting for Jay-Z, knowing his lyrical content, his themes that he likes to touch on, and Pharrell. He's a bit of a businessman himself. Obviously, Jay-Z and Pharrell have made a lot of songs together, a lot of hits together, but this is not the typical party, radio-friendly tunes we're used to when they drop songs. This is about systematic racism and black economic empowerment. As Pharrell told Time Magazine, it's about how tough it is to be an entrepreneur in our country to begin with, especially as someone of color. There are a lot of systematic disadvantages and purposeful blockages. How can you get a fire started or even the hope of an ember to start a fire when you're staring at the disadvantages with regards to healthcare, education, and representation? Good points from Pharrell here. My issue with it is the music itself isn't the most exciting, isn't the most interesting or dynamic. It's not bad, but I think it's not very memorable, and I think this is a indication of the problems that some artists are having at addressing the current moment, the hyper-political, hyper-aware, especially of racial dynamics in the country right now that a lot of artists are trying to explore in their music. Sometimes if you address it too head-on, it becomes a bit ham-fisted, which I think was the mistake with this song. So it's a matter of finding that balance between what's politically charged, what's effective as political messaging, and what's good music. And that's a very hard line to figure out, to balance, and sometimes you just miss. I think they kind of missed on this, but hey, at least they're giving it a shot, and it was cool to see them get back together. In Best of the Week, Flo Milli is popping off. If you're not familiar with Flo Milli, she dropped her debut album, I believe, at the end of July. And from there, it's kind of taken off, especially on TikTok. And she's getting glowing press coverage. So she's a critical darling. She's a darling on social media. And that's pretty much the recipe to become a star, which is sort of the trajectory she's on right now. Her songs are always fun. If you ever need a self-esteem boost, I definitely recommend Flo Milli. She is the most confident, self-assured rapper in the game right now, male or female. Yeah, we may need to do an episode on her in the future because she's really blowing up right now. If you want to get a sense of what her sound is like, what her lyrics are like, listen to the Beef Flow mix. Beef Flow mix. Flo Milli. Check it out. That's the one that's popping off on TikTok as well. She takes that Playboy Cardi song, Beef, does her own version on it. Kills it. Just full of energy. Full of verve. Yeah, she's going to be a star. Also, good of the week. Best of the week. Inside Lands. Now, if you're not familiar, there's a music festival called Outside Lands that takes place in San Francisco in Golden Gate Park around now. Yeah, actually it would have been, I think, last week or maybe this week. That's not happening, obviously, because of the pandemic. Got moved to 2021. So in the meantime, the organizers of Outside Lands are hosting a virtual music festival called Inside Lands. It's going to be on Twitch. It's free to stream. It's going to take place August 29th and August 28th, 29th. You're going to have live performances, interviews with artists, and some bonus stuff with LCD Sound System, Gorillaz, J. Cole, Jack White, Sharon Van Etten, Kehlani, and more. You can check out the full roster on InsideLands.com or just Google it. It's a pretty good lineup. And I think it's cool. It's a good compromise during this time of, obviously, live music is suspended for a long while, so we got to take what we can get. And the virtual concert is becoming a more popular format for live music in the meantime. And I'm not sure if they've done a festival online, a virtual festival, but looks like we're getting one here with Inside Lands. So that'll be interesting to check out. If you're just bored on August 28th or 29th, give it a try. I don't have Twitch. I'm probably going to wait till someone takes the Twitch stream and throws it up on YouTube, to be honest. But if you have Twitch, go fire that thing up. In Best of the Week, we have Drake and Lil Durk's Laugh Now, Cry Later. And I'm not saying it's Best of the Week because it's a great song or because I love it. That's a negative on both. But it's best of the week because it is just the energy of a great week, of feeling good about yourself, of taking a victory lap. That's what this song is. Though it may not really appeal to me, just because I have my own problems with Drake. Obviously, Drake is a hugely popular force in music right now, and people are going to love this song because it's light, it's breezy, it's pop, it's got nice little horn section. It feels like a graduation song. Like this could be played when you're walking down to receive your diploma or something, or when you accomplish some big task. Like, just throw this thing on. It's got that kind of energy to it. And it feels like the soundtrack to the dynamic we have with Drake right now, where he is unkillable. No matter what happens to Drake, no matter the Pusha T drama you're hiding kid, no matter the criticism he gets increasingly from the music press, and even from hip-hop in general, the man is unkillable. He feels indestructible at this point. And Drake knows this. And that's basically what he's saying on this song. He says at one point, it's not a closable gap between me and the rest of you guys. That also may be a subtle diss at Kanye, who's working with Gap, just to stir the pot a little bit there. And if you're not familiar with the music video, it is luxury incarnate. We have Drake at the Nike headquarters. It's basically an advertisement for Nike. He's just shopping. He's using all their facilities. We get some athlete cameos. We get Marshawn Lynch. We get Odell Beckham. We get Kevin Durant. And we get Drake really trying to meme himself. There's a shot of him crying in a Nike jacket. It's supposed to be kind of a tongue-in-cheek, self-deprecating thing, but it will definitely be a meme, which is all part of Drake's strategy to take over the internet, stay relevant, because if you can become a GIF or a meme, that is almost as valuable as having a number one hit these days. Drake knows that. He's a very smart, calculating artist and businessman. And we even get a Lil Durk feature on this. If you're not familiar with Lil Durk, he's one of the legends of the Chicago drill scene. Him and Chief Keef kind of at the forefront of all that. And it's good to see Lil Durk get on a mainstream record like this that's going to blow up. His verse is really, really short. I wish it was longer, but he does a good job. Nice to see him on that. And right now it just feels like with Drake, he's basically in the Vinny Chase in Entourage phase of his life. If you're not familiar with Entourage, it follows the career of a Hollywood star. And this Hollywood star named Vinny Chase has a saying that it'll work out. It always does. And in the show, it always does. And in Drake's career, it always does. That's it for Best and Worst of the Week. After the break, we're going to get into the relationship between music and politics. Oh, that's going to be a spicy one. Stick around for that.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Here we are. Show's almost done for you folks. Maybe you're sad. maybe you're ready to get on with your day. In any event, let's get into it. The relationship between music and politics. Why am I bringing this up now? Well, in case you're not aware, the Democratic National Convention just occurred this past week, and as part of the 3-day convention, there were a lot of speeches, of course, a lot of debates, a lot of news, a lot of policy proposals, yada yada, typical stuff. But you also had musical performances. And you had big names performing. You had Leon Bridges, you had John Legend, you had Jennifer Hudson, and you had Billie Eilish all perform at the DNC convention. When Billie Eilish took the stage, she prefaced her performance of My Future, saying to the camera, quote, "Donald Trump is destroying our country and everything we care about. We need leaders who will solve problems like climate change and COVID, not deny them. Leaders who will fight against systematic racism and inequality." The 18-year-old, who is now able to vote in her first election this year, added, "Silence is not an option and we cannot sit this one out. We all have to vote like our lives and the world depend on it, because they do. The only way to be certain of the future is to make it ourselves." Pretty powerful political statement there. And to me, seeing these musicians, as someone as big as Billie Eilish, putting herself out there, making a political statement, not only making a political statement, but doing it at the Democratic National Convention, allying herself with the Democratic Party and Joe Biden's presidential run, is pretty interesting. And that could be a discussion in its own right, but I thought this was a great portal into a larger conversation about how music is used specifically in campaigns and by people running for office to further their political ambitions. Because politics, it's all about what can you do for me, what kind of votes can you get for me, what is the upside. It's a quid pro quo relationship here. And so I think you have to break it down into control and intention. So does the artist have control over how their music or their image is being used in a political context? And what is the intention behind their involvement or their support of a political movement or figure? So let's look at some cases. One of my favorite cases to look at when it comes to political campaigns and musicians is Bruce Springsteen's song, Born in the USA. Obviously a very upbeat, dance kind of arena rock song. Has that huge chorus where he just blares Born in the USA. And as a result, a lot of people take that song, sing it, and think it's just a bland patriotic song that's just simply a big anthem for America and how awesome America is. When in reality, the meaning is a bit more complicated than that. It's actually about a Vietnam veteran going off to war, coming back, trying to get a job, being denied a job, being denied help from the VA, kind of finding himself stuck in life. He's a working class guy and all the jobs have left. It's a pretty bleak picture of American life. And so the refrain, Born in the USA, is actually more of a sarcastic jab at patriotism and the quote-unquote American dream. That being said, lots of political campaigns and political figures have attached themselves to the song's meaning on a surface level. Take, for example, Ronald Reagan, who referenced Bruce Springsteen in a 1984 campaign speech saying, America's future rests in 1,000 dreams inside your hearts. It rests in the message of hope and songs of a man so many young Americans admire, New Jersey's own Bruce Springsteen. And helping you make those dreams come true is what this job of mine is all about. Now, Bruce Springsteen is a liberal. His politics are way left of Reagan. Yet, Reagan heard Born in the USA, used it in his campaign, played it often, and even referenced Bruce Springsteen in his speech. Donald Trump used Born in the USA himself in his 2016 campaign for president. All that, despite the fact you have lyrics like, "So they put a rifle in my hand, sent me off to a foreign land to go and kill the yellow man." You think people would hear that and maybe realize the song is actually a critique of American culture, its foreign policy, its politics, and just its entire image? But no, it gets used surface level. People focus on the chorus, and that's what it means to people. So in that case, you have Bruce Springsteen, who is a liberal, maybe you call him a leftist, definitely a pro-working class sort of musician, whose lyrics and songs are being used by politicians who are right of center or right wing compared to him. That is a case in where the artist has no control over his song being used in that manner, and his intention is being misconstrued. Bruce Springsteen wrote that song to critique America. Instead, it's being used to further the political ambitions of someone else. So that's a case where the artist really has no control over what's going on. That being said, there are cases where the artist is directly involved, like the DNC, where Billie Eilish comes out, clearly criticizes President Trump, and is saying, vote for Biden, vote for the Democrats. That's her being very intentional with what she wants her music and what she wants her fans to support, look towards, value. That is a layer of control that she's controlling her music. She's allowing it to be used by a political party, and her intention is to do so because she wants to support the other candidate, wants certain policies to be enacted, wants to see certain changes in politics. And pop music is pretty common, very common in American politics. Bill Clinton used Fleetwood Mac's Don't Stop. Obama used will.i.am's Yes We Can. Katy Perry was used a ton by Hillary Clinton. Each political campaign we saw this year had its own little theme song. It's very, very common for politicians to use musicians and certain songs to present an image to the public, how they want to be seen. What you're playing at your campaigns is an extension of what you're saying this campaign, this party, what we're about, what we represent. So Bernie Sanders is going to play maybe some folk classics that are about revolution and about fighting for what's right and standing up for what you believe in, while Ted Cruz is going to play a Christian band to emphasize his evangelical roots, appeal to voters in that regard. They can use music to further their own personas, because that's very important in politics. You want people to know what you stand for, and your music taste, the music you want to share with your voters, says a lot, and is a way to convince them that you're the real deal, that you represent X or Y or Z values. Now, political figures, political parties, they don't just use songs, they also use figures. Like we've already talked about Billie Eilish. FDR used a lot of musicians, a lot of jazz musicians during his campaign. I think his parents were big, Frank Sinatra's parents were big FDR supporters. Later on, Frank Sinatra would go on to campaign for JFK, stump for him, and even call in a few favors to help him get some more votes in places like Illinois and New Jersey. That sort of involvement with figures in music is a way for politicians to say, hey, your favorite musician likes me. If you like him, ipso facto, you should vote for me. It makes a ton of sense. Bing Crosby, used by Eisenhower. Later in Frank Sinatra's life, he would switch from the Democrats to the Republicans. He would go and support Nixon and use his fame to further Nixon's election bid. So, a lot of times, musicians don't have control over politicians using their music. They don't get to decide what politicians are going to use their music, but they do have a lot of control when they can come out and decide, like Billie Eilish did, I'm going to come out to the DNC. That is a choice to align yourself with the Democratic Party or just align yourself against Trump and his election bid. And that, going back to musicians not always having control, there's a big gray area between whether political campaigns are licensed to use certain artists' music. It's a bit unclear of how legal it is, but you've already seen artists like Adele, Aerosmith, the Beatles, Elton John, Linkin Park, Nickelback, Panic at the Disco, Prince, Queen, R.E.M., Rihanna, the Rolling Stones, Tom Petty all ask the Trump campaign to stop using their music. Now, these political campaigns don't always have to obey that, but usually if you're getting a letter from an artist saying, please don't use our music, you're probably not going to want to use their music. But the point is, once your music's out in the world, you don't get to... the control you have over how it's interpreted is gone. You can try to be as intentional in your songwriting and in your song craft as possible, but sometimes your music's going to get misconstrued, and it may be a critique of America like Born in the USA, but used later on as just this blindly patriotic song with people not analyzing the lyrics to it. You don't really have control over it. And that is both the gift and the curse of music, is your audience oftentimes decides how significant, how substantial the music is. So you really do have to look at it through that dichotomy of control versus intention. Intention is important when it comes to music, but it's also usually unknown. You're not going to know what the artist's headspace was when they wrote this song. Sometimes the lyrics are so obvious that it's like, okay, clearly the intention is don't vote for Nazis, right? Like the Dead Kennedy song. Clearly they're not a fan of Nazis. They're not a fan of white supremacists. Or sometimes you'll have songs that you don't really know. Boulevard of Broken Dreams by Green Day. That could be used by both the right and the left to be like, America is in a boulevard of broken dreams right now. We failed the American dream. That could be plausibly used by both parties. That could apply to each. Now, we know Green Day is punk rock. They lean heavily left. They were extremely critical of George Bush's administration in particular. But maybe you're a music fan, you don't know the intention behind that. You hear Boulevard of Broken Dreams, it's kind of vague, and then a politician takes that vague song and uses it for their own means. That's just sort of what happens. that is the reality of music and politics. It's sometimes neatly aligned. The artist will come out, support the candidate, allow them to use their music, sometimes even perform, obviously, or come and have a real relationship. Think of Jay-Z and Beyonce at Obama's inauguration. They're clearly close with the president, close enough that he allowed them and invited them to stay for his inauguration, have nice seats, come talk to him in private afterwards. Or it's like Bruce Springsteen, your music is just taken, maybe without your consent, maybe misconstrued, but you don't have control over it in that sense. Music is one of those things that crosses partisan lines, can appeal to both people on the right and the left. And you see that in political campaigns as well. Usually it's kind of messy. The musicians may not want to align themselves with politicians, but politicians see the value in having music and musical figures behind them because they're way more popular than politicians. So if they can get a musician to support them, that's huge. If they can use a popular song in their campaign to give people a sense of what they stand for, attract them in any kind of way, they're going to use that. Now, this is a discussion I'd love to go deeper in. We may discuss it in future episodes, but thank you for listening to the GSMC Music Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. As always, I'd like to ask you that you please remember to subscribe to the show, write a nice review. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, any other places that matter. Thank you. Have a good night. Can't wait for the next one. See you soon.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.